I don't come into any fight with any other mindset than to just kick it.
Brock Lesnar has always been the kind of man who speaks his mind with no filters and zero sugarcoating, and now that brutal honesty has him exposing a dark truth about Hulk Hogan. According to Lesnar, the so-called American hero isn't the icon fans grew up idolizing, but someone who has been pulling strings and playing some of the dirtiest political games in WWE history. Lesnar's words hit harder because he's not known for gossip or drama. When he speaks, it carries weight, and what he's suggesting is simple. Behind the red and yellow, behind the flexing and the slogans, Hogan has been quietly shaping the business in ways that benefited him while burying others. Coming from the Beast, this isn't just criticism, it's a silent condemnation of one of wrestling's biggest legends.
I really don't like people. I'm sorry, I don't.
Brock Lesnar would go on to become the unintentional spokesperson for a generation of wrestlers who had grown tired of Hulk Hogan's grip on professional wrestling. To understand the weight of what Lesnar represented, you first have to look at the world he stepped into. Hulk Hogan's WWE career had transformed wrestling forever, taking it from small regional shows to a global entertainment powerhouse during the 1980s Hulkamania boom. His red and yellow gear, bandana, mustache, and catchphrases like "brother" turned him into a cultural icon. But behind the fame, his success created resentment among wrestlers, fans, and insiders who saw Hogan's ego-driven politics, where personal gain came before the good of the business. The contrast between Hogan and Lesnar couldn't have been more clear. Hogan built his empire on charisma and backstage maneuvering, while Lesnar was the exact opposite, pure, unfiltered authenticity. When Lesnar spoke bluntly, it wasn't about selling merchandise or playing to the crowd. It was the voice of a real fighter who had dominated every challenge put in front of him. His resume spoke for itself. NCAA Division I Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, the youngest WWE champion in history at that time, and UFC Heavyweight Champion. A trio of accomplishments that no one else in wrestling could claim, cementing him as a once-in-a-lifetime force who didn't need politics to prove his greatness. More importantly, Brock Lesnar's rise wasn't built on backstage politics or favors from powerful insiders. It was forged through pure grit, relentless work, and a level of physical dominance few could match. The first real clash of these two wrestling worlds happened on August 8th, 2002, during their SmackDown match. On paper, it was supposed to be a tune-up bout designed to make Lesnar look strong before his showdown with The Rock. But what unfolded was much more than a storyline. It was a symbolic takedown of everything Hulk Hogan stood for. From this opening lockup, Lesnar made his point clear by disrespecting Hogan, shoving him across the ring and ripping off his bandana. Hogan tried his signature comebacks, even hitting his trademark Hulk-up routine, but it didn't matter. Lesnar crushed him, winning by technical submission with a bear hug that left Hogan passed out. What happened after the match drove the message home even harder. Lesnar grabbed a steel chair and smashed Hogan's head, leaving the legend bloodied and broken in his own ring. This wasn't just another scripted moment, it was a statement. A real athlete, a proven champion from the toughest combat sports, had torn down the carefully crafted mythology of wrestling's biggest star, showing the world that Hulkamania's era of smoke and mirrors was giving way to raw, undeniable legitimacy. The match itself was well received by fans, many pointing out how Hogan's size made Lesnar look almost ordinary, even though the young powerhouse dominated from bell to bell. But the real glimpse into Lesnar's feelings toward Hogan wouldn't surface until more than a decade later, in a single moment that cut through years of frustration across the industry. On August 11th, 2014, WWE staged a grand celebration for Hogan's 61st birthday on Monday Night Raw. It was meant to be a nostalgic tribute, complete with legends like Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Scott Hall surrounding the ring, but what followed turned into a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. Lesnar, alongside his advocate Paul Heyman, stormed the celebration to hype his upcoming SummerSlam match against John Cena, but his focus quickly shifted. Circling the ring, Lesnar locked eyes with each legend before stopping at Hogan, leaning in and growling, "Party's over, Grandpa." Without missing a beat, Heyman piled on with the mocking jab. "What you gonna do, Hulkster?" The cutting remark, reportedly unscripted, was pure Lesnar, a blunt, unsanitized shot that hit harder than any scripted line could. Backstage, it set off a storm. Hogan was said to be legitimately furious, with TMZ reporting on the heat and even noting that John Cena had to step in to calm Hogan both on camera and after the show. That moment went beyond a simple insult. It symbolized decades of pent-up resentment from wrestlers who had watched Hogan play politics, manipulate opportunities, and hoard the spotlight, while countless others who worked just as hard, if not harder, were left behind. Lesnar's "party's over, Grandpa" wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment jab, it was a generational declaration that the age of politics over performance was coming to an end. To understand why the line hit so hard, you have to look back at Hogan's controversial legacy. In 1986, just before WrestleMania 2, Hogan reportedly tipped off Vince McMahon about Jesse Ventura's attempt to unionize wrestlers for fair pay, health benefits, and basic protections. That betrayal crushed any chance of change, and the fallout was massive. Hogan went on to earn more at WrestleMania 3 than the rest of the roster combined, including Andre the Giant, while Ventura eventually left the WWF in frustration. Years later, the betrayal came out under oath during McMahon's 1994 trial, confirming the suspicions that had fueled resentment across the locker room for decades. For countless wrestlers who went without health care, retirement security, or even basic job protections, Hogan's actions weren't just selfish, they were destructive. Lesnar's entire career stood in direct opposition to that kind of politicking. He never pretended to be a locker room saint, never sold empty promises of brotherhood, and never manipulated emotions to win over the crowd. What he brought to the table was raw honesty about his motivations, his capabilities, and his dominance. Even in interviews where Hogan relied on catchphrases and superhero comebacks, Lesnar spoke with a blunt authenticity that made his presence feel more real than any gimmick ever could.
I'm not a man of many words, all right? That's why I have a guy that does all my talking for me.
He explained this when asked about his mental approach to facing opponents, making it clear that his mindset was never about mind games or fake intimidation, but about staying real, focused, and brutally honest, which separated him from the exaggerated characters who relied on catchphrases and theatrics to connect with fans.
I can't answer that. I'm not out there to feel another man's emotion. I mean, that's ridiculous.
He continued, dismissing the manufactured drama that formed the backbone of sports entertainment. Perhaps most tellingly, Lesnar's physical presence in wrestling rings served as a constant reminder of what legitimate athletic achievement looked like. Joe Rogan and Hulk Hogan themselves discussed Lesnar's incredible physical attributes during a podcast appearance with Rogan, noting that Lesnar's NFL combined numbers included a 4.7-second 40-yard dash at 283 lb, a 35 in vertical jump, and 30 repetitions of 225 lbs on the bench press.
Like, you don't understand what that guy did. Like, what that guy did is nothing short of insanity. Like, no one's ever done that before.
Rogan explained this while pointing out that Lesnar's move from WWE to the UFC wasn't just a publicity stunt, but proof of his real athletic power. Unlike many wrestlers who stayed within the scripted world of sports entertainment, Lesnar stepped into the cage against the toughest fighters in the world and proved himself by becoming UFC heavyweight champion. This transition highlighted the difference between a performer and a true competitor, and for many fans, it cemented Lesnar's reputation as one of the most legitimate athletes ever to cross over between professional wrestling and real combat sports.
He's a monster, brother.
He's a monster.
He still is. Still is.
So he's like the biggest genetic freak maybe I've ever seen in the sport.
Hogan himself admitted this, and that rare moment of honesty made it clear just how big the gap was between his manufactured persona and Lesnar's real athletic dominance. While Hogan's career was built on the illusion of superhuman strength and stamina, Lesnar actually had the physical power and toughness that had been proven in the most demanding arenas of competition. The deeper we look into the relationship between Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan, the clearer it becomes that their rivalry was never just about a generational clash, but about two very different views of what professional wrestling should be and what kind of people deserve to rise within it. Hogan's career was defined by ruthless political maneuvering, with creative control clauses and backstage influence that often led to decisions designed to protect his own status instead of the long-term health of the industry. The most glaring example of Hogan's politics came with the infamous finger poke of doom in WCW in 1999, where he and Kevin Nash staged a fake fight that insulted fans and played a key role in WCW's downfall. Even worse was his repeated refusal to lose cleanly to younger stars, most famously at WCW Starrcade 1997 against Sting, where instead of putting over the company's top babyface, Hogan manipulated the finish with a botched fast count and restart. This wasn't just about ego, it was about breaking the very foundation of wrestling storytelling, where veterans are supposed to eventually pass the torch. Legends like Steve Austin and Mick Foley openly accused Hogan of holding back younger talent, with Austin going as far as refusing matches with him to avoid being buried by Hogan's politics. These weren't rare slip-ups, but a consistent pattern. That defined much of Hogan's career, and standing opposite to that was Brock Lesnar, whose approach to the business couldn't have been more different. When Brock Lesnar made his WWE return in 2012, he didn't walk in demanding creative control, or special privileges like Hulk Hogan so often had. Instead, he embraced being portrayed as a true threat to the established order, regardless of the politics behind the scenes. Lesnar made it clear that he believed success in wrestling should come from ability, not manipulation. This belief carried over into how he worked with others, as he was willing to make opponents look strong whether he won or lost. His shocking victory over The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, ending the legendary streak, was a move focused on long-term storytelling rather than short-term ego. Lesnar understood that his role wasn't just about building himself, but about lifting the entire product. The contrast in philosophy became clear when comparing how others reacted to working with each man. The Undertaker, in a candid interview, admitted he had serious concerns about the NWO's return to WWE, calling it a potential cancer in the locker room due to oversized egos and destructive politics.
And those guys came in with a huge rap on them, you know. I mean, I dealt with them all before in their previous stints here. So, you know, and then I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have my reservations about them coming in.
The Undertaker explained his concerns, and while he was specifically talking about the NWO, the bigger picture of his comments reflected a deep worry about wrestlers who cared more about their own advancement than the success of the business as a whole. This point becomes especially important when looking at Hogan's influence during his different runs in WWE and WCW, where his decisions often centered on protecting his own spotlight. Lesnar's philosophy stood in sharp contrast because his place at the top wasn't secured through backstage politics or creative manipulation, but through undeniable ability and proven dominance. His presence in the industry symbolized a shift away from manufactured leverage and toward authentic performance.
I'm a prize fighter, all right? I come to Monday Night Raw to promote fights.
He explained his philosophy by stressing that he saw wrestling as a form of real competition rather than just scripted entertainment, and this perspective allowed him to stay true to himself while still working inside the system. The way the wrestling community reacted to these two very different approaches was telling. Hogan was constantly surrounded by controversy, ego clashes, and backstage politics, while Lesnar kept his reputation solid, even among peers who could have easily resented his success. A big part of that came from Lesnar's balance of acknowledging the scripted nature of wrestling while also bringing authentic athletic credentials that no one could deny. Hogan, on the other hand, damaged his own credibility with a long track record of wild claims and exaggerations that eroded trust in him. He often boasted about wrestling 400 days a year thanks to time zones, claimed he was scouted by Major League Baseball, said he turned down the George Foreman grill deal, and even insisted he partied with John Belushi after WrestleMania 2, even though Belushi had passed away in 1982. The most damaging of these tall tales in relation to Lesnar came from Hogan's repeated false claims that he was the first wrestler to face Lesnar after his UFC run. The truth is, Lesnar's first WWE match after returning from UFC was against John Cena at Extreme Rules 2012, and Hogan wasn't even working for WWE at the time. Yet Hogan repeated this story over and over, including during Joe Rogan's podcast in 2023 and again in a 2025 TMZ interview, which only sparked more ridicule across Reddit and social media. What made these lies especially damaging was that they showed Hogan's constant need to insert himself into the accomplishments of others, even long after his prime had ended. Lesnar's reaction to these fabrications was, as always, straightforward. Instead of sparking public feuds or trying to set the record straight through endless interviews, he relied on his actions to do the talking. He summed it up simply, letting the difference between his authenticity and the manufactured personas of others become clear without needing to shout about it. This same authenticity shaped the way Lesnar handled his business in in wrestling. Unlike Hogan, who was infamous for using influence to manipulate bookings and keep himself on top at the expense of others, Lesnar dealt with his career using professional pragmatism. He knew his worth, negotiated hard, and demanded his value, but he didn't lean on destructive political games to maintain his spot. Perhaps the most telling part of Lesnar's philosophy came in the way he addressed the reality of the wrestling industry. In one interview, he openly explained that he understood the fine line between entertainment and legitimate competition, proving that he saw the business for what it truly was without losing his sense of authenticity. He continued with his trademark bluntness, and this honesty about the harsh truths of professional wrestling stood in complete contrast to Hogan's habit of mythologizing his own career. While Hogan built his legacy on the illusion that victories came from training, prayers, and vitamins, Lesnar cut through the fantasy by admitting the reality. Success came from a mix of real athletic talent, predetermined results, and the spectacle of entertainment. The political weight of this honesty was massive because by refusing to feed into the myths that carried Hogan for decades, Lesnar was pushing for a new vision of professional wrestling, one grounded in true athletic achievement and clear business practices instead of fake drama and backstage power plays. This difference was especially clear when looking at how each man handled his career exits. Hogan's departures were usually messy, often tied to lawsuits, bitter fallouts, and broken bridges, from the political circus that helped sink WCW to the controversies that soured his run in TNA. Lesnar, on the other hand, handled his transitions with professionalism and respect. When he left WWE for the UFC in 2004, he did it cleanly, without scandal, proving that his approach was rooted in honesty rather than manipulation. In his autobiography Death Clutch, Lesnar criticized WWE's system but avoided personal attacks, choosing instead to highlight the deeper structural flaws in the business. That's why when he returned in 2012, both the company and the fans welcomed him back, because he had preserved his credibility and reputation in a way few wrestlers ever manage. And that's the final verdict. Lesnar never needed a tell-all, book, or explosive shoot interview to expose Hogan. The real blow came from simply existing as everything Hogan only pretended to be, but without the personal flaws that tarnished Hogan's legacy. The most damaging revelation about Hogan wasn't even in the ring, it was the 2015 racism scandal that erupted when leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape surfaced during his lawsuit against Gawker. On that tape, Hogan repeatedly used racial slurs and complained about his daughter Brooke dating a black man, going so far as to admit, "I am a racist to a point," along with other disturbing comments. He responded immediately, firing him on July 24th, 2015, scrubbing his name from their Hall of Fame, pulling all his merchandise, and erasing him from their website. The contrast was brutal. Hogan, the so-called American hero who preached prayers and positive values, exposed in private as someone filled with racial prejudice. And when it came to controversies like this, Lesnar's answer was simple. He never created them. In a candid moment, Stone Cold Steve Austin once asked him directly, "What do you mean you don't like people?" A question that revealed just how different Lesnar's philosophy was from Hogan's need for public approval.
I like being around a bunch of people, and it's kind of ironic because I can go out in an arena full of 20,000 people and be all right with it. Only because I feel like I'm in this dome and I'm protected.
Lesnar replied with his trademark honesty, and that blunt admission revealed something essential about who he really is. He wasn't interested in polishing an image to win fans or crafting a character to sell more merchandise. Unlike Hogan, who built a carefully packaged persona meant to maximize fame and marketability, Lesnar showed himself exactly as he was, a fiercely private, even antisocial competitor who just happened to be one of the most naturally dominant athletes in the history of combat sports.
That's just who I am. That's why I live out in the middle of nowhere. That's why I got a 8-foot fence around my property. That's why I shut the gate when I come and go. That's just who I am.
Lesnar explained this in a way that showed he knew exactly who he was and lived true to that without worrying about what others expected. His authenticity carried over into everything about his career. When asked why he returned to WWE, he didn't sugarcoat anything or try to spin his answer for a family-friendly audience. He was blunt about his reasons. That honesty stands in sharp contrast to Hogan's approach. Hogan spent his career carefully building the image of a children's hero, preaching about training, prayers, and vitamins, all while privately living in ways that directly clashed with those values. His admission of steroid use during Vince McMahon's 1994 trial, after years of denial, was just one example of that gap between image and reality. But the biggest difference between the two came in how they dealt with success and failure. When Lesnar was sidelined by diverticulitis in the UFC, he was upfront about his health struggles and the toll it took on his career, never trying to downplay it or spin it. Hogan, on the other hand, followed his usual pattern when hit with scandals, like his racism controversy, by trying to minimize, explain away, or reframe his words instead of owning them. For Hogan, setbacks meant deflection and damage control. For Lesnar, they meant honesty, no matter how uncomfortable. The wrestling community's reaction to these two very different approaches spoke volumes. When Hogan's racism scandal exploded, respected veterans like Mark Henry, Booker T, and JTG openly expressed how hurt and doubtful they were about his supposed remorse, highlighting just how deeply his actions cut into the locker room's trust. Lesnar, meanwhile, kept the respect of wrestlers across both racial and generational lines, not because he was politically correct or diplomatic, but because he was straightforward. Even when his honesty was uncomfortable, it was still better than the kind of polished but hypocritical personas that eventually crumble. When Hogan passed away from cardiac arrest at age 71 in July 2025, the media didn't just celebrate his legacy, it also couldn't ignore the scandals that had weighed it down for decades. The fact that his obituaries focused as much on controversy as on his in-ring accomplishments showed how much his reputation had deteriorated. Lesnar, by contrast, represented something larger than himself. He challenged the very system that allowed wrestlers like Hogan to dominate through politics and manipulation, by proving that real athletic dominance and authenticity could exist alongside commercial success. Lesnar showed that the industry didn't need the manufactured drama or the ruthless backstage politics that defined Hogan's career. This was reinforced by legends like The Undertaker, who once warned about cancer in the locker room and expressed concerns about certain egos returning. While he didn't name Hogan directly, his words captured the kind of thinking Lesnar lived. By wrestlers should raise the entire product, not just themselves.
The WWF locker room is completely different from what those guys have ever probably been around. That's a close-knit group of guys. You know what? They all out there to do business, and there's no time for all the BS.
The Undertaker explained this clearly, showing the type of professional environment where a wrestler like Lesnar could grow while those depending on politics and manipulation would fail. The timing of these revelations and events tells a powerful story about how professional wrestling has changed over time. As the business became more open and fans better understood its scripted nature, stars like Hogan, who built their image on false myths, started falling behind audience expectations and modern standards. On the other hand, Lesnar's career path showed what the future of wrestling looks like, where athletes with real competitive skill can perform at the highest level while still fitting into the entertainment side of the industry.
Eat, sleep, kick it, repeat. That's what I do. And I happen to enjoy it, and I'm happy to be very good at it.
He explained with his usual simplicity, breaking down his entire philosophy into just a few clear sentences, and this direct approach helped Lesnar deal with controversies and challenges that might have ruined others who built their careers on weaker foundations. Whenever people questioned his dedication to wrestling compared to his other pursuits, he spoke openly about his true priorities and reasons instead of creating fake stories to protect his image. The final verdict on what Lesnar revealed about Hogan is more damaging than any open accusation, because by simply being a real athlete who stayed true to himself while finding major success, Lesnar proved that everything Hogan pretended to stand for could actually be achieved without lies, manipulation, or backstage politics. The fact that Hogan often lied about his supposed matches and history with Lesnar, taking credit for things he never did, made him look desperate to hold on to relevance in a wrestling world that had already moved past his style of manufactured drama. The way the wrestling industry has remembered both men also tells the story. While Hogan's role in making wrestling popular cannot be ignored, the long-term harm caused by his selfish moves became clearer as time passed, with big names like Bret Hart and CM Punk openly criticizing his behavior and leaving a record that clashes with his fake public image. Lesnar, on the other hand, built a legacy that has stayed mostly free from the scandals and controversies that followed Hogan throughout his career. Even wrestlers who may disagree with Lesnar's philosophy still respect his authenticity, real achievements, and this respect highlights the core difference between those who lift the business up and those who use it only for themselves. The symbolic impact of Lesnar's famous 2014 "Party's Over Grandpa" comment becomes even clearer when seen in this light, because it wasn't just an insult to an older star, it was a statement that the new generation had arrived, led by someone who embodied what wrestling's future could look like. Where Hogan stood for the old style built on fake drama and backstage politics, Lesnar represented a new standard that combined real athletic excellence with straightforward professionalism. What made this most important was the fact that Lesnar proved big success didn't have to come with the kind of moral compromises that marked so much of Hogan's career. By staying true to himself while still becoming a mainstream draw, Lesnar showed that fans will support and respect performers who keep their integrity instead of chasing easy popularity with lies or manipulation. His ongoing career stands as a model for how modern wrestlers can handle the balance between entertainment and honesty, and his example has already shaped a new generation that understands true long-term success comes from skill and authenticity, not from politics and manufactured drama. The awful truth Brock Lesnar revealed about Hulk Hogan wasn't tied to one single statement or dramatic moment. It was shown in the clear and constant contrast between two completely different ways of approaching success, integrity, and professional responsibility. Lesnar, through his actions more than his words, proved that everything Hogan had spent years claiming to represent could actually be achieved more effectively and with lasting impact by relying on honesty, authenticity, and real athletic ability. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click on one of the boxes on your screen to check out more content just like this.